So should we introduce ourselves or something? Or
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
okay, so calling in from Boston, this is Anne James with Zymbol.
I am John Gosslee in Lynchburg, Virginia.
I'm in Moscow. My name is Taras.
So Blitzkrieg, am I saying it right? First of all,
Yes.
Blitzkrieg. All right. So in Blitzkrieg, there are images of vacant spaces, empty spaces, space vessels being filled, especially the mouth, which kind of go back to the first lines, the I'm a pelican that has swallowed the fish, being reeled in by the fisherman. So I'm wondering if you could talk maybe about what the fish and the fisherman might represent, and the sort of the role of emptiness in the poem.
One, the idea of the pelican swallowing the fish, and then that fish already being on a reel, being reeled in by the fisherman, I felt was like a very 21st century thing. It was like an apt metaphor for pretty much everybody's lives that are in the first or second world, maybe not so much as people in the third world. Because we all are constantly going after something, and quite a lot of us have gotten really good at getting it, but then also like production, along with advertising psychology, has also come to a place where they can present something and then let people go and get it.
Right.
But the point of that is that it's always like leading towards something else. And so the idea is that the pelican doesn't know that the fish is being reeled in by the fisherman or about the actual presence of the fisherman. And I feel like that's kind of the way that I would say a lot of people think about things. Like, we're like, oh, I like this. And I'm like, oh, I like this. But we don't always necessarily think about like what the next thing that leads to is. But there's always something further. So that's where that came from. And then the idea, too, of being freed from this in some way is also in there. Because sometimes, I don't know, I feel like it's really funny and it's all a little bit ridiculous, but it's all really beautiful at the same time. So that's the part with the pelican. And the part where it mentions the mouth throughout the poems, or empty vessels being filled, is also really something that, one, I think that it's important to lose oneself completely and to be empty at different times. I feel like this is a very healthy thing. It's to basically deconstruct, deconstruct back to a very like primal, naturalistic way of viewing the world that's free of all of its constructs. So that's why there's like a lot of emptiness in there. And where we see the mouth in the poems is usually in a more sensual setting. And the reason for that is because I think after our sexuality, after our genitalia, probably the mouth is the next most part that people look to the most sensually. And so that's why that's kind of present in the areas that is. It's very sexual imagery.
So the other question, sort of looking into the symbolism of this, is the sort of unreliability of the narrator. This I, it starts off and then it disappears sort of in the middle of the poems and comes back towards the end, especially in the last poem, in a way that sort of makes you rethink what you just read. And it's a narrator that seems to be experiencing an identity crisis, and there's a struggle, certainly goes back to the title. And I wonder if you could talk maybe about the role of that narrator, if it's meant to sort of be a frustrating read to some degree, and maybe the different kinds of assault that are taking place for the reader.
Yeah, basically with that one specific word, assault, you definitely hit on the general way that every single line in the whole Blitzkrieg sequence is written. Every single line can be isolated and plugged into other places. And so basically with the very last poem in the sequence, it's basically a mashup that takes one line from all of the other poems.
Right.
And I saw a poem, I don't remember who it was by, that had this very strong enjambment. And I thought, that's really fascinating. I wonder if I could do this. So basically, I worked on these poems for like a year and a half. And it was important to me to have a presence of self, but then also I wanted to remove that at the same time so that the reader would be disoriented in some way, because I feel like where there is disorientation, then we can always come to something greater.
Right.
For people that believe in spirituality, a lot of the mystical journeys that shamans or seekers go on are full of disorientation. And we see this throughout different religious stories, like people fasting for long amounts of time, which disorients the body and the mind. In a lot of Christian and Muslim religious stories. Basically, the disorientation is what either can bring us into ourself or push us outside of the search. And I feel like the more that a person wants to know, the more that they can find out. But there has to be some kind of, as Rimbaud would say, derangement of the senses. That was one of his big things. It was just being completely psychologically deranged in order to come to a greater truth. Then, if we also look at what Keats said, he said that when he wrote, as if he's still writing, when he wrote, that he often felt like his selfhood was removed completely. Like he was writing from some other place, there's no self. And I really identify with that a lot when I'm doing the artistic experience of writing. But I also feel like it's very important to be a person and to have selfhood. And so that's why we see like very strong statements about I. Like, I am like a dog roaming from yard to yard. Or I put my hand on the deer's neck. Mm-hmm. I think I wrote it better than that, but yeah. So that's that's the reason why we kind of like see like this disorientation is to allow people to go to the whole thing, but then you'll notice that like at the end it brings you back to the title again. Right. It's like questioning. It's that circular thing that causes us to re-examine the journey after we've gone on it, whether it's scientific or artistic or like ambulances driving people's roads.
Oh, I want to ask Terrace. So how did you get involved with Blitzkrieg, this project? How did John kind of introduce this to you?
Well, we both attended AWP in Boston recently in March. Were you present there as well?
I think that's where we met too, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the conference is for, I guess. And I was walking through I think it was on the second floor, there was like all this exhibition of various publications and by poets, and I was looking at various publications, and I stopped by at this Fjords magazine with beautiful cover, and I kind of do pay attention to the synchronicity, and I was I just booked a ticket to Norway, and I got back from Norway for a scout trip, and I'm heading heading there soon again. And for me, the fjords were like kind of a manifestation of some of my journeys. So I stood by for a second, and John was kind enough to introduce himself, and we exchanged coordinates, and then I received email from him. I was already at, I don't remember, I think I was in New York at the time, and he was really moved by projects of mine and what I do with poetry, digitized text, and working with various algorithms. So we start communicating and exchange further with material, and I received his poem, and we've done one test track, and everyone was happy. So that's how we decided to proceed for a full-fledged publication of the book.
How will this be presented in its sort of final form? Are you guys going to do, you mentioned, John, a performance in New York, or sort of an installation somewhere, hopefully, or how do you both kind of envision this kind of coming together?
Well, the publication of the book is like more traditional way of putting out poems and all this content. I'm involved in an electronic literature organization based in MIT, but it's an international group of scholars who study a next paradigm of poetry and literature in general. You are aware that last year there was initiation by the Congress to scan all the text in the Congress library, and it's actually a world tendency. So we will have all the texts throughout the human history in digital format. So obviously the interfaces that's been for centuries used to access this information in forms of scrolls or books become a little bit inadequate to access the same the digital realm. So there will be a sort of a necessity for a new efficient interfaces to access this, in a sense, holographic data of texts, literature in general. And this opens up a new possibilities, a new spheres, and new industries, in a sense. And I'm interested in developing and kind of being on the avant-garde of this movement. And for now, it's quite a marginal community of scholars who are involved in electronic literature, but it has impressive database. And my colleague, she's in St. Petersburg at the moment. She's actually received a grant to basically organized all the Russian electronic literature in one database. I think it's called LMSIP, which is based in Bergen University. So this is also part of you basically making a catalog of all the available resources at the moment, and obviously working on the new ones and developing some sort of a universal form. So my understanding, obviously, I would be like in a bridge, in a sense, from a very traditional way of accessing the poetry, a book, a bridge to a digital realm in the form of it's a digital publication, a digital publishing. It's a multimedia content. It will be, in a sense, video poems. Well, obviously, there will be an audio content, just for listening, but there'll be a video present as well. So there will be an option, whatever listener or reader would like to access this information, either full content with visuals or just the audio or just the text.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about Terrace's work was the digitization. And so one of the things that I saw that they had also done with some of their past work is set it to video. So I thought that it would be interesting to liaise with a filmmaker and to after Terrace is done with the musical side of it, to have some of these put into a film version for exhibition in some different galleries around the country and a couple of different museums as well. So that is where the idea of the multimedia experience comes, and then we're also going to offer that through the Blitzkrieg HQ.com site also. So and I think we'll be talking later about some specific galleries or places that we know in New York that will be interested in exhibiting this. I already know that I have a couple of people interested, and one of the things we're also doing on the site is we're promoting it so that directly to the buying public and art appreciating public, but then also directly to the galleries or the museums who do the bookings. So we have a specific tab on the site so that after they read about it and see about it, they can go ahead and contact us to do the booking. And we'll kind of take a lot of that on a case-by-case basis. But I thought that was something important. This is something that I feel like is on the frontier of where literature is. And I also saw that Machine Libertine, Terrace, and Natalie's work was also what I feel like is on the frontier of where literature is headed. Right. Which is why I think that we definitely resonated.
So while you were working on the score, was this sort of a collaborative thing? Did you refer back to John for some ideas, or was this sort of more your reaction to what you had read?
Well, I have a tremendous experience with working with text. I work with poetry from the late 90s, when actually I jumped to this digital revolution when the converters become available, digital audio converters, and then there was a revolution in the post-production industry. So I started experimenting right away on poetry, on the poetry reciting. I work with poets and have quite a few numbers of albums released. That's poetry being used in a non-conventional way. Obviously, we have Allen Ginsberg and Burroughs with the albums reciting, with the music on background, etc. But I went a little bit further. Obviously, I applied contemporary algorithms, some of the technology that modulating the voices. The synthesized voices, the particular Machine Libertine project, for instance, using a lot of synthetic voices to text-to-speech algorithms. And this is a really interesting, to me, as a way to bring the sort of static text to make it more alive and through the technology. So obviously the aesthetics are a big concern of mine. I do pay attention a lot to aesthetics, and I find that electronic music and has a very wide spectrum that you could really have a lot of canvas, for instance, to have a larger picture rather than have a conventional way of utilizing, the musical instruments, etc. So working with texts of John, first of all, I related to some imagery of New York. There's some present imagery of the city, which I'm based, and I could relate to that, and as well as the overall theme of that I think was quite appropriate especially due to the circumstances that we had, for the last decade in the States, and still it's very kind of raw issue at the moment with the surveillance, with the wars, and so I kind of heard this, this kind of crying out in a sense, right? In the form of poetry. And this I wouldn't say desperation, but a kind of conflict, internal conflict. And I always thought that poetry is a great way to mediate these social concerns in a more elegant way, rather than have this, burst out of protests and riots, etc. So poetry for me is a way to modulate and kind of mediate these concerns in a more artistic way.
How much of this is a story? How much of it could be called narrative in a traditional sense? I don't think we could really call it a narrative. But there's certainly an attempt on the part of the reader to construct a narrative, to kind of figure out what's happening here, to make some explanation for it. And I'm wondering if this is sort of in the new style that you've developed when you're writing Portrait of an Inner Life that's included in the book.
Part of what I realize that our brains do as people is we attempt to construct something that we can either control or extract from. And in the book, a lot of that is most of these are actual things that actually did happen. So I took the narrative and I tried to deconstruct all of it down to its essential components. So let's say in Manhattan in Fall, for instance, which the artist Valerie Leonard, who's in England, just recently read, and she said she absolutely just loved this poem. The imagery within that is very... You could just take one line, and it sits on its own. If you have two lines together, they could still sit on their own. But it's when we start to get, I would say, to about three things, we start to try to make this story around it, And there is a little bit of the idea of narrative is there, but it's all you have to perceive it for it to be there. But it's really just about walking around in New York and seeing these different things. Everything that we see is really from the viewpoint of a person walking, and that's very intentionally done. So all of the viewpoints and all of the lines, all the poems are very constructed to be from a specific view. So if we look at let's say the poem Lorelei, for instance, that we find out at the end is not about the traditional German mythology of the woman who sings from this one corner of the Rhine causing boats to wreck, but it's actually taking that and using it as a metaphor for prostitution. And so we see a lot of different viewpoints in that. Some we're looking up at her singing. Other ones we're looking at what is being carried in the boats down the Rhine River. And so there is the narrative there, but I wanted the reader to impose the story rather than to tell the story.
Having gone through this process, what are your thoughts on this type of poetry multimedia collaboration?
Overall, I would say that I always encourage these kind of initiatives and collaborations. I find pleasure in collaborations, and for me, this is also a challenge, because we only met once, and nevertheless, we already achieved some, decently some kind of results. So this obviously there's a lot of obstacles, but those challenges also motivates me, kind of overcome and get more efficient to the processes. So I'd say this is a good example of how perhaps next phase of creative processes will be among the poets and poets community. I would encourage poets to interact with media. For instance, there is a lot of talk in academia about the digital humanity, as the humanity in itself already kind of dying out. It's been so stagnant, and that they become aware of itself themselves. So they're bringing technology in to kind of give us a way to broaden our we become on a global scale. So there's, as you see, we are on different timelines now, different cities, and nevertheless we communicate and using contemporary tools. AWP really overwhelmed me with the amount of poets present in the country. It was a lot of people and creative people. So I thought that this is a very potent market, if you wish, or like a sphere that's not been quite developed yet. So inviting the technology in, setting up some examples, I think that would be quite, it could give a burst to a wider creative processes on a larger scale.
And I agree with what Tara said, in that I feel like our new playground as a planet is online.
Definitely.
And so that's why, like with Blitzkrieg, one of the things that we're offering what I would call the art objects now, the book, and and we'll also have like a hard copy CD, and we have some other ephemera or items that go with the whole package. But we're also offering to people who purchase the whole package, they can screen everybody will be invited who gets what we call the assault package. They will be.
You've thought about this.
They will be invited to an online screening of the music and the films with Terrace and I and the filmmaker, and we will all watch it together. And then they can ask Terrace or myself or the filmmaker any questions that they have. And it's all very specifically laid out on our website. We have all of our 3 product things laid out because I felt like it was important. I'm really trying to understand how to get into this new media area, and that was one of the things that I really liked about what Terrace does, is that in Machine Libertine, everything is this new area, and that's where all of the most amazing things happen. And I wanted to say this too. My friend and poet Kamal Ayildiz, when I visited with him last year in New York, he said all of the hard work in literature is being made in poetry. And I thought that was interesting, because if we look at it all historically, that plays out. If you study the history of poetry and then how other people tend to take and unpack those things and elaborate it. And one of the things that really resonated with Machine Libertine for me was that they are a media poetry group. And so I thought they get it. This is what's going on right now. This is the edge. This is where we're pushing forward. I haven't heard of anybody else doing anything exactly like we're doing yet.
Yeah, I haven't. When you sent me the links to Machine Libertine performing, it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. So.
Yeah. And I wanted to say, too, that the reason that this whole project happened is because my friends and publishers Rob Cook and Stephanie Dickinson, who run the really great magazine Skid Row Penthouse, and their publishing arm, Rain Mountain Press, asked me if I had anything that I wanted them to look at. And I said, I'm not sure, but I have this idea. And so they said, okay, well, let's hear it. And then so I presented to them. They said, okay, let's do it. So that was kind of the first thing, was because they said, that they wanted to do this. And then Terrace and I had met shortly before that. And so I thought, you know what? This is it. This is like a new thing that we can all do, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, it's great to find publishers who are willing to try different things like that.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to mention a larger issue that I'm also concerned is obviously coming from sound and music. I'm involved in this subject of a sonic ecology. I'm raising an awareness of sonic aspects in our lives. Obviously, poetry being vocalized or reciting becomes sound in itself. So poetry automatically included in my research and my work. And also there is a subject of educational practices. As I said, by producing this content and performing it, we, in a sense, demonstrating it's become like an educational interface for an inspirational source for a lot of poets and creative people. So I believe that this would be an efficient way to kind of give these issues an extra point with every project like that, with every other poet that is involved or resonate with this issue. We kind of reaching up a critical mass that actually will have an impact on a global scale.
I agree with Terrace on that. I think that things are definitely shifting, but I think that most people are not aware of it. I think a lot of the people that even can dialogue about it aren't internally aware of it. To me, I feel the changes that I think will be coming in the next 20 to 30 years. And so that's something that Terrace and I definitely connected on as well. We have a lot of same key concepts.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here, Terrace and John.
Thank you very much for doing this interview with us too. I think it's
Thank you.
Good. Yeah.
All right, guys.
All right,
I hope to see you soon. See you soon in New York or in Boston.
All right.
sounds good. Bye, Terrace.
Bye.
Good night.